All right, guys, I am continuing a part 2 interval training, rest-based training, zone 2 training. How should you figure out if you are the one that needs to do sprint interval training, if you need to do HIIT training, how often per week, and if you're doing it right? Because I think a lot of people are doing interval training, but they're really doing zone 3 training. A lot of people think they're doing zone 2 training and they're really just doing zone 3 training. So, what is zone 2 training and what is interval training? Zone 3 is going to be more tempo. Maybe you're training for a half marathon, 10K race. You're holding an interval for 10 to 20 minutes, recovery, then do it again. So, race pace work. Now, if we're training for life, if we're training for weight loss, body composition training, or if we're training for specific race goals, we want to look at my slides. I've been putting some great pictures into some blog articles to keep all these notes in one spot. So, diving into this a little bit deeper than I did yesterday, part 1, interval training versus HIIT training. I interpret sprint interval training as zone 5 to zone 1. HIIT training is more zone 4 to zone 1. So sprint interval training is 10 to 30 seconds, all out, max, super maximal efforts, long periods of recovery time to ensure full phosphagen recovery. So the fuel source you're using, we'll go into that next. And longer recovery periods to get the benefits here. We want to target this non-oxygen phosphorylation power, neuromuscular adaptation, and we'll go into this more, biogenesis, mitochondrial biogenesis. Who is this good for? Speed, power, we lose as we get older. So think about creating your workout program if you're middle-aged. I hate that I have to say that now. It's so, ugh. I feel that we need to change how we're training. So as you're going through your 40s and you're starting to look at how do I want to be performing, moving, living life, and when I'm 70, 89 years old, is sprint interval training right for me? Have I been exercising? Where are you now in your current program? So I wouldn't necessarily go all out. Maybe we do it a little differently, reverse engineer it. Now, speed, power is an important part to improve how we age because we think about what we lose as we age. We lose our metabolism slows down, so we can change that. Our speed changes, our power. We can change all of this. We can make it better by making adjustments in a workout program. Metabolic flexibility. If you have too much time only in zone 2, you may not be good at using carbs for fuel and working at the higher end. Vice versa. If you only do HIIT training, you're not efficient at fat metabolism. So it's always what I said when I opened my fitness studio, 2010, is that we need to, CrossFit was really big, and then yoga is big. So I always thought we always need to meet in the middle instead of just doing HIIT training, Metcons, doing CrossFit, doing Orange Theory, and then there's yoga. We all need to mix it up. Okay, so going back to the presentation, HIIT training on the other side is going to be a little longer. So sprint training is 10 to 30 seconds, and then HIIT training would be 30 seconds to up to maybe 4 minutes. So 1 to 3 minutes. This is 80 to 95% of VO2 max. Now, remember, if you've listened to other videos I've done on metabolism testing, we are not using math to figure out your training zones. We're actually testing your metabolism wearing the mask with your oxygen and carbon dioxide measured. So we're measuring and observing where the fuel switches are, looking at breathing frequencies and some other markers. We don't need to do a mathematical equation estimating where your HIIT training would be. So when we say 80 to 95% of VO2 max, we don't need to do that if we've done your test. Now, HIIT training, you're going to have recovery periods are a little bit shorter than a sprint interval, but you need to be able to come back down to your zone 1. The improvements in zone 4 are VO2 max, lactate threshold, and metabolic efficiency through cardiovascular mitochondria adaptations. And what we do in PNOE testing on the reports I went over, and we're showing the RMR. The test sample report was here, looking at the types of interval training we need to do. Now, what amount? Short interval training, 10 to 30 seconds. You're using the ATP PC system as the dominant fuel source. When you're going to the medium intervals, 30 seconds to 3 minutes, that's glycolytic system. And then when you're doing more tempo, it's a kind of a mixture of carbohydrates and fat. So that's more that zone 3. We determine those heart rates for you. Now, sprint training, your heart rate monitor is not going to pick up in time because you're just going 10 to 30 seconds. So your heart rate you got to will be after you're already done on your recovery. So you just go hard as you can. Your VO2 max, VO2 peak, we're determining, and your RER is a fuel source, carbohydrate versus fat oxidation. And then the ventilatory threshold 1 and 2 is what we're measuring. And fat max, we can look at if you need more time in zone 2 and what that is for you. Now, I call it rest-based training. I forget who taught me this years ago. The duration of recovery, time into zone 1 to allow a lower RER score, determines the rest to work to rest ratio. So everyone's a little different. This is why it's hard to say everyone just you have 30 seconds before you go again. Some people, if they're new to interval training, they may take 2 minutes to come down to zone 1. If you've been doing interval training correctly, your zone 1 might come down in 1 minute. So this is where we need to individualize when we're ready to go to our next sprint. So rest-based interval training is a great way to see, am I getting improvements in my interval training? Is my heart rate coming down? So the theory is, instead of using a fixed recovery time, individuals recover until their heart rate, your lactate levels, if you're doing that. But really, we're just looking at heart rate, come down to baseline, your zone 1, before we go back. This helps you quality of effort rather than excessive fatigue accumulation. This is why I think a majority of people doing interval training are what Stacy Sims talks about. You're not going hard enough to make it sprint interval training. And it's same thing opposite. If you're going zone 2, you're not making it easy enough. So you get stuck in that gray zone. We call zone 3 is that gray zone. Is just kind of, you're not getting the benefits of interval training, and you're not getting the benefits of peak fat training. So this is why I'm a huge believer, obviously, in testing and not guessing. But we want to improve your fat oxidation rate. We want to increase our health of the mitochondria function, get new mitochondria. So how do you get started? Base training. A lot of people have not, I hate the word poor, but not the best peak fat max. They might be around 70 to 80 heart rate. And we need to start there and build that base up. Maybe once a week, twice a week, I have them do a zone 2, and then we do some 20-second rev up their engine on a bike and maybe run some stairs, but just 20, 30 seconds. Come back down, 2 minutes easy, and do that. This is a great way to start. Now, when do you need to add intervals? Well, maybe we've established this fat max, your zone 2, and then we add intervals to improve your VO2 max, your benefits we'll talk about from interval training coming up here. So HIIT training and then sit training suggested for speed and power gain. So we might want to work on an individual basis. So who benefits from interval training? If you're doing endurance work, race, you need a higher lactate clearance, race day speed, VO2 max. If you're not improving your fat max, go to what Phil Maffetone taught us 30 years ago. The Maffetone formula, max aerobic function, 180 minus your age. You stay at that and do a monthly test. It's 3 miles at that max heart rate, max aerobic function heart rate, 180 minus your age. So say you're 50 years old, you're training at around 130 heart rate, and you're doing a 3-mile test each month. And if you stop getting faster and faster at that 130 heart rate, that's when you add in some speed work, right? Did I say that right? I think that's what it was. Individuals with time constraints looking for metabolic efficiency gains and shorter sessions. So this is where you can do some interval, get more bang from your buck, as I'm doing next when I'm wearing my tank top. I'm going to go for a like 55-minute workout. We go out here, do Mount Ridge Zero, and then we come down the hill, go down by Lake Hodges, then we have another hill, and then we come back up to our neighborhood. There's another hill, Eucalyptus Street. So we have 3 hills that I can do some pickups on and get my heart rate up, recoveries on the downhill, and then we're done. So that is a good way for me to do a minimal effective dose workout. I call it the Jack and Jill workout. Now, mitochondria function. So we're working on improving mitochondria as we age to improve fat oxidation, performance for endurance events, races. Interval training helps improve mitochondria function 3 different ways. So mitochondria biogenesis is creating new mitochondria. More mitochondria, we create more ATP. So more energy currency. So if you want to retire and make lots of money, you want to get more hourly pay, right? You want to get more money made. So you want that is your energy currency, talking money for your exercise into ATP is your currency, energy currency, more ATP, the better, right? So more money I make per hour, the better. Now, we want to get healthier, more robust mitochondria, and the ones that are starting to get dysfunctional, we want to get rid of them. How do we improve the efficiency of our mitochondria? We want to have the mitochondria use energy quickly and use the oxygen and reduce the reliance, which is why we got into this metabolic efficiency training years ago. Bob Siebelhor taught me all this 2009 when I got into realizing, all right, I'm training for endurance events. I need to be increasing my fat oxidation rate and moving that metabolic efficiency higher and higher. When I do Pinoe metabolism testing, we want to look at where you are now. What are you doing? How much resistance training, cardio interval training do you need? Not what social media tells you or any experts tell you, but you as a unique individual. The VO2 max testing we do, or peak, can help us figure out your zones. Today, this is a picture of when I used to do new leaf testing years ago, and you can see that metabolic crossover point. This is a little loop here, but I wonder what the heart rate is. This is me when I was at my peak. I can't even see, but that's new leaf, how that crossover point was so high up and we're burning lots of fat. So we used to do this test, the metabolic cart. Now Pinoe is a nice portable cart that I can take places and test. And it's nice to have it portable rather than just in one clinic. Now, if you're trying to lose weight, this is where, I don't really love the American Heart Association recommendations, but what is right for you? Strength training, cardio training, interval training. Do I need more zone 2? If I'm trying to lose weight, well, let's look at your resting metabolism test. What is your metabolism looking like? And then we look at your exercise report. What are your zones? What did we find your training to be? If your zone 1's really low, or if your metabolism really low, your fat oxidation is low, so then we can figure out what ratio of each you need. So this is kind of what I put together on that blog. Now you can go back, I'll put that link. Now today I was putting together this metabolic harmony. I like to see, all right, if I'm using this different fuel source, so if I'm in zone 1, 2, I'm burning carbohydrates a little bit and then fat for sure is my peak. So we call it oxidative phosphorylation. So that's where we want to really work on mitochondria. We're creating a lot more ATP when we're using fat as our fuel source. Beta oxidation, Krebs cycle, and boom, lots of energy, less oxidative stress. Now, when we get up a little higher intensity, you can see this carbohydrate usage goes in it. We call that glycolysis, using glucose, and it goes through pyruvate into the Krebs cycle. And then as you go higher in the intensity and the intervals are shorter, you can see at the top end, you're using the phosphagen system, creatine phosphate. And you can see that change in stored ATPs for that quick 10, 20 seconds, like sprint or weightlifting. So this is a great chart, even though it doesn't look good when I zoom it in, so you can check that out. Now, when we're doing your testing, the 5 training zones, zone 1, you can dive into this a little deeper, but that's your recovery, and that's your low intensity. This is where you're mostly fat oxidation with some carbohydrate usage. The benefit here is on that recovery, enhancing recovery by increasing blood flow. You're improving mitochondria efficiency and fat oxidation. You're strengthening your nervous system and builds strong aerobic base. Now, this says strengthens the parasympathetic nervous system, but I don't say that because you're still, heart rate's not totally low. Now, easy pace workouts, walking, cycling, conversational pace. It depends. Some people have to walk, other people to get in zone 1. It depends how fit you are. Now, zone 2 is where we hear a lot of talk about peak fat max. Where are you burning the most amount of fat with minimal carbohydrates? That is your zone 2, bottom of your zone 2. The top of your zone 2, when I'm doing testing, is that metabolic crossover point. Why should you train here? How long? That depends. But if you need to improve your mitochondria density and mitochondria function, that's going to be an important area to train. If you are poor at metabolizing fat, you're not metabolically efficient using fat for fuel, we need to train and improve there and then course correct. So this is where you're doing that zone 2 specific cycling, you're jogging, maybe you're swimming, long, steady distance. Okay, so this is good to train your metabolic health. Now, tempo, I call zone 3, tempo zone, the oxidative system's still working, but now we're having that crossover. So go back to that little picture here. As we start to go zone 3, it's a little bit of carbohydrates and a little bit of fat. So zone 3 is now going to be above that metabolic crossover point. You can see the pictures somewhere here, metabolic crossover point, how it goes above and carbohydrates go down. Now, zone 4, that'll be working more glycolytic, it's called. So anaerobic metabolism isn't the best word anymore, but your non-oxidative phosphorylation is kind of a mouthful. But mostly carbohydrate metabolism, minimal fat oxidation, increases your lactate threshold, allowing athletes or individuals to sustain higher intensities longer, improves buffering capacity and endurance of anaerobic endurance, and develop power and speed. So interval training here would be that 4x4 workout, working on some good intervals. 4 by 10 minutes would be more zone 3, but doing a 4x4 VO2 max workout would be more this bottom of zone 4. Now, zone 5 is where we're doing more sprint interval training, not even 60 seconds, I would say 30 to 45 seconds all out. That fuel system, I think, is important to understand. Creatine, phosphatidyl-creatine, and that creatine is going to be used for fuel. So this is where we can see that fuel sources changes. We're getting not really protein broken down. Ideally, we don't want to break down protein for fuel, but glucose, mostly fats. And then we get a little harder, zone 3. And then your metabolic crossover point is zone 3. Your glucose will be a little higher than the fat. So this will be glucose is a little more, but you're still burning fat. And then higher intensity, you go glucose. So we're shifting the fuel source as we go. So we can look at fat oxidation, and here's a crossover picture, metabolic point where the fat drops down and the carbohydrate usage goes up, and that's about where your zone 3 would begin. Now, we talked a lot about a few episodes on AMPK activation versus mTOR. mTOR is used to build muscle, and AMPK is activation is a good, well, it's here, it says here, regulator of energy balance. So when we're lower intensity, zone 1 and 2, AMPK pathways are activated due to increased AMP to ATP ratio, signaling we have low energy availability. So what we're looking at is stimulating fat oxidation. So actually I'm drinking right now this little liquid liposomal delivery called TRIM, and ask me for the link if you want to learn more. Free workout to improve my fat oxidation. Now, I am doing a harder workout, but it could help increase my fat oxidation while I'm going higher heart rate. So I might change my fuel source not to be all carbohydrates, but still higher percent of fat, and move this metabolic crossover point up higher. Now, AMPK, we can review here, increases transport of fatty acids into mitochondria, activating, well, we don't go CPT1 carnitine, we want to look at that word, upregulating mitochondria biogenesis. We want to know how to do that if we're working on how we age. And then it inhibits acetyl-CoA, well, a bunch of words that inhibits the opposite function. I'll have someone else explain that. The body relies on oxidative phosphorylation, the mitochondria, which efficiently generates ATP from fat stores. So if you want to improve your fat oxidation, improve mitochondria biogenesis, we do want to spend time in this zone 1 and zone 2, where we're working on peak fat mass. Do not use a percentage if you can get this tested, as with myself, or find someone near you, or come to see me in Solana Beach, and we'll get you tested, and then ideally do it every 2 months. Now, when we're shifting to the higher intensities, we're shifting the fuel source, remember? So fat metabolism after zone 3, fat gets lower and glycolysis increases. So we can't keep up the system ATP. When we're in zone 2, it's a slow enough pace that we can generate that ATP because it takes longer. But now we need the energy now. We need it fast. We need a delivery right away. So we have increased glycolysis. This creates ATP faster from glucose breakdown. Now we're reducing fatty acid oxidation, and this rising levels of acetyl-CoA and citrate inhibit CPT, slowing the fat transport into mitochondria. So now we're increasing lactate, and we are learning more about lactate, conversion from pyruvate into lactate, and then it can be used for fuel source by the body using lactate. So listen to that podcast, and Ben Bickman and Andy Gaplin did a great one on lactate as well. Muscle glycogen is a primary fuel as mitochondria reach their oxidative limit, forcing the body to do more non-oxidative glycolysis. So another infographic that doesn't look good, expanded, but looking at the ATP PC, that's using why we need to supplement creatine, and show the different fuel source. So zone 3 we talked about, and then there's sprint training. Now here we're talking about zone 4, 5, your HIIT training, and then zone 5, your sprint training. So now we're looking at the phosphagen system. This supplies immediate energy for short bursts, those sprints. And then we have rapid glucose breakdown with lactate production to sustain the high intensity work. And then fat oxidation is nearly shut down because glycolysis provides ATP at much higher rate than beta oxidation, where we use fat for fuel. We have more lactate and hydrogen ion accumulation. Now, hydrogen ion and hydrogen more in the blood, pH level changes. That's what causes the burn, not the lactate. So when you're working these higher intensities, when you say it's lactic acid burn, we need to switch that, say it's a hydrogen ion pH imbalance causing a burn. But this is inhibiting mitochondrial function. Now, oxygen availability is obviously lower at these high intensities, so this changes your metabolism to non-aerobic, so oxidative phosphorylation is no longer. So key takeaways: low intensity fat oxidation, AMPK activation; moderate intensity glycolytic shift increases carb usage, fat oxidation due to glycolytic inhibition; lactate production begins to rise, so it's zone 3. Then we get to high intensity glycolysis, zone 4, and ATP system, zone 5. Mitochondrial oxidation maxes out, faster ATP via glycolysis, and lactate accumulation doesn't really lead to fatigue. It's the hydrogen ions. Now, the shift of the body in the different intensities, I got this great chart. So here's another crossover point. Again, we don't want to look at percentage, that's math. We're actually testing what heart rate range, it's not one number, but where your carbs come up and fat goes down. That's crossover. So I got this nice little chart made by my friend, GP. Now, exercise intensity, energy system, primary fuel, the mechanism of action I always put in so we know, and the physiological changes. So zone 1 and 2, tempo I call zone 3, and then zone 4, and then zone 5. So the LT1 is kind of where the shift metabolic crossover point is. And then you see this lactate threshold, the fuel source more LT2. Now, see the crossover point. Now, how do you do sprint interval training correctly? We'll go into that next. Mechanism for recovery, how to do sprints and recover long enough. We'll go into that. I put it to chart and then got some good infographics on Google search, but really want to go into another video on how to stimulate this mitochondria. So again, a great chart you can look on there, but let's continue on this rabbit hole with shorter videos. So let me know what your questions are, how you're training, and how your recovery is going in between your sprints. All right, I'm going to go do a hill workout out here and get my heart rate up and bring it all the way down and then go up again.